implementing circular economic principles. The campaign got launched earlier this year with a series of specially curated articles in the Times of India focusing on various sectors where different aspects of circularity were highlighted. As the campaign moves to the next phase, high-level state-wise discussions are being organized with stakeholders to discuss and deliberate on how an effective and implementable policy action can be taken, and the same is adopted at various levels. I now request Mr. Robin David to please present the welcome address.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you. A very warm welcome to KT Ramarao Garu also. I know he has a busy schedule, but he is interested in this subject, so I'm happy that he's here. A warm welcome to Jayesh Ranjan Garu, to Shidana Kishore, Ms. Madhulika Chaudhary, and Ms. Kalpana Ramesh. Thank you for joining us for this panel. I think it is important to stay here that we are meeting in this, we have gathered here today at a time when the United Nations Climate Change Conference has just ended. And I feel that nothing much came out of it, except perhaps a little money for poorer countries. We are also sitting here today when there is a war going on in Ukraine and energy prices around the world have skyrocketed. When energy prices skyrocket, you have inflation. When you have inflation, economies are hurting. And when economies are hurting, I realize very few people talk about climate change. But at the same time, in the last 2 years, we've had severe rains damaging our crops. We've had very bad floods hurting our cities. We've had some of the most polluted cities in India hurting people's health. And we've had fires around the world. So I think whether you like it or not, we have to start talking about climate change. And that is, in fact, one of the figures that I saw online was Niti Aayog figures was that India's GDP is hurts about 20% of its GDP is hurt because of climate change. So we cannot ignore this subject anymore. And that is why we went into, Times of India went into this whole initiative of the circular economy and creating more and more awareness about it. Instead of me now, I think many of you are experts in this field. It's very happy to have you here. And instead of me preaching to the converted, I would like KTR Garu to come and talk to us. One word about KTR Garu is that as journalists, we often talk to politicians. They tell us a lot of interesting things, but most of the interesting things are off record. With KTR Garu, many of the interesting things are on record, so it is always a pleasure to listen to him. I hope he does some plain speak here as well. Thank you.
He's done your job. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the entire team of Times of India for having us here on this very, very important topic. But before I begin, I'd like to start with a video that I want to play for you. This is the video where Hyderabad was recently recognized as the world's green city in Seoul. Just wanted to play that video for you and then we take it from there.
Hyderabad, a city with an iconic heritage. Besides advancing in technology, innovation and infrastructure, Hyderabad is also transforming into the world's #1 eco-friendly city, meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Hyderabad was awarded Tree City of the World twice for the years 2020 and 2021 by FAO and Arbor Day Foundation. Now, Hyderabad, the capital city of Telangana, wins another laurel. Hyderabad beats Paris, Montreal, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, while competing with 57 entries from over 40 cities across 24 countries, and won the World Green City Award 2022 and Living Green for Economic Recovery and Inclusive Growth Award by the International Association of Horticulture Producers. AIPH celebrates this fantastic achievement. For the city of Hyderabad, we can confidently say that Hyderabad is a world leader in nature-oriented approaches to city design, form and function, says Mr. Tim Briarcliffe, Secretary General, AIPH. The credit for this remarkable achievement goes to the champion of greenery, Honorable Chief Minister Shri K. Chandrasekhar Rao and his government for the various green initiatives and environment-friendly policies, particularly Telangana Ku Haritaharam, the brainchild of the Honorable Chief Minister and the world's third largest human endeavour in afforestation. With progressive policies, thoughtful leadership and inspiring governance over the last 8 years, Telangana, the youngest state in India, is leading the country with its path-breaking initiatives. This award is a great honour and glory for the city, for the state and for the nation.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm very glad to be a part of this Replanet initiative of the Times of India, with very specific focus on water and the importance of circular economy. This topic assumes a lot of significance, and there's a lot of topical significance with reference to urban areas, and me being the Urban Development Minister, I also wanted to share with you a few things that we have attempted and a few things where we have succeeded, and also areas where we are still working on in terms of ensuring that our cities, which have turned into heat islands and have become single biggest contributor to carbon emissions, have to be tackled. And this is something that I say not just as a Minister for Urban Development, but also as a very concerned citizen and as a concerned father who's worried about the future generations as well. As we all understand, as we all know, cities across the world, not just in India, have become the economic engines, propelling our growth stories across the universe, across the planet. Now, if you just look at India, or if you look at Telangana for that matter, more than 45% of Telangana's GSDP actually comes from Hyderabad and the suburban areas of Hyderabad. Same is the logic for every single nation across the world. In fact, a few years ago, I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. A few years ago, I had a meeting with Satya Nadella, who is the chairman of Microsoft, CEO and chairman of Microsoft. So when I was sharing with him that Telangana is a very urban state and a large chunk of our revenue actually comes from urban pockets, Satya shared something very insightful and interesting. He said, even though Microsoft actually exists in nearly 180 countries in terms of presence, 70% of Microsoft's revenue also comes from 80 cities across the world. So cities have become magnets for investment. Cities have become magnets for migration, urbanization, primarily because, people migrate to cities in search of better livelihood opportunities, better education facilities, better healthcare facilities. In general, better living standards is what they come in anticipation of. As a result, what we are witnessing today is, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, Honorable Minister, Union Minister, keeps referring to this, and let me paraphrase him a bit. Mr. Gadkari keeps telling us whenever we meet him that whatever urbanization has happened over the last 5,000 years is likely to happen over the next 50 years. The same quantum of urbanization that has happened in the last 5,000 years will be happening again, will be repeating itself over the course of next 50 years. So that kind of points you to the enormity of the challenge at hand for all of us. The importance of urban areas, of course, cannot be overruled. It can be gauged from the fact that while urban areas in terms of geographical expanse constitute for 5%, but they contribute to 46% of the population in Telangana and to about 2/3 of the GSDP of the state. To put it in numbers, let me put it this way. If you look at Telangana as a state, our geographical area that the state currently kind of covers or extends to is about 1,12,000 square kilometers, out of which Hyderabad alone is 675 square kilometers. But if you look at other urban pockets also in the entire state of Telangana, it would not be more than 2,000 square kilometers. So what are we talking about here? 1,12,000 square kilometers versus 2,000 square kilometers. But if you look at the population, 46.8% of the population is in this 2,000 square kilometers, whereas the remaining population is in the rest of 1,10,000 square kilometers. So that kind of goes to show you why the urban infrastructure keeps crumbling. Because, the density of population, the paucity of space, that presents a huge challenge to the entire urban development department that I head. As I just pointed out, the socio-economic outlook of Telangana 2022 actually shows that Telangana's urban population is 46.8 compared to the national average of 31.16. That makes us one of the most urbanized states in the country. I think we are the third most urban state after Tamil Nadu, which is at 48.45, and Kerala at 47.23, and right after us is Maharashtra at 45.23. So that makes Telangana one of the most urbanized states in the entire country. And we are also one of the fastest growing urban economies in the country. When the state of Telangana was formed in 2014, we had 68 ULBs, the urban local bodies. But now the number has been increased to 142. That includes Hyderabad as well. Hyderabad, while we have still many challenges and many issues to tackle, I'm happy to share with you that over the last 5 years, and more particularly from the period 2015 until 2020, Hyderabad has been rated consistently by Mercer as the best city in India on the quality of living index. And I'm very, very proud of the fact that this has come even despite all the challenges after the new state was formed, the transition, etc., etc. But our goal is not just to be the best in India. Our ambition is larger. We are audacious in terms of vision, because our Honorable Chief Minister will not rest on laurels. He's not somebody who's content being known as the best in India. He's given us a task. He's asked us to be one among the best cities, best top 25 cities in the world in terms of livability index. And that's a humongous task, because if you look at the global rankings, while Hyderabad is #1 in India in terms of livability, on the world index we are still 140. So that gives us another huge task in terms of moving up that ladder, because it's a huge task. So what are we doing? What are we trying to do to ensure that we live up to that vision? What are we trying to do to ensure that Hyderabad actually becomes a sustainable city in terms of all the methods, practices that we follow? One of the things I will talk about today, which I'm very proud of, our Metro Water Supply and Sewerage Board's MD is here, Dana Kishore. Let me also tell you something that I'm truly proud of. Hyderabad will become the first city in India come March, April next year, which would be treating every single drop of sewerage. We have undertaken a humongous task, are setting up nearly 31 sewerage treatment plants with a capacity of 1,259 MLD of sewerage treatment, sewerage waste, costing us about 3,866 crore. And once completed at a secondary level, this treatment would be of secondary level and backed by legislation. This will make Hyderabad, among all Indian cities, the first city to have achieved 100% treatment of sewerage, which I'm very proud of. And I do believe this will set a new benchmark for the rest of India. Now, how do we plan to reuse this water, treated water? We plan to reuse in construction, because construction is happening very aggressively across the city and also neighboring areas. We plan to mandate utilization of treated water by all the builders and construction companies, and we also will be using it for landscaping activities and horticulture activities. We could potentially also, in fact, use this water, treated water, to cool the furnaces and thermal plants and to do a number of other things as well. The second important intervention that I would like to talk about is effective management of surplus runoff water, especially during floods in Hyderabad. A lot of people complain, a lot of people talk about how cities in India, cities across the world are not equipped, fully to handle flood-like situations. Robin talked about climate change. Climate change, global warming was a topic that we used to read about in newspapers. Look at it, glance at it for a minute, and then used to say, okay, this is not my concern. This possibly is happening elsewhere in the world, not in my backyard. That was the approach earlier. But now, we all know climate change is real. It's already knocking on your doors. It's already at your doorstep. It's affecting all of us. As a person who's involved in public life, as a policy maker, I've been witnessing some very disturbing changes across different seasons. We are now accustomed to unseasonal rains in October. And we are also accustomed to, unfortunately, late arrival of monsoons. We are also accustomed to cloudbursts. And we are accustomed to 45, 46 degrees temperatures in summer. Now these are unusual patterns. These are exceptional patterns. But looks like exception is going to become the norm. Expecting the unexpected is going to be the challenge for governments. I cannot take cover, I cannot take an excuse to my citizens stating that cloud burst and unseasonal rain, unprecedented rain has resulted in a flood-like situation, which may be the reality. But I don't think the citizens are going to accept that sort of an explanation in future anymore. So therefore, in Hyderabad, we have started on an important task, because no city in the world can of course deal with cloudbursts or torrential rains, but the least we can do is to prepare as well as we can, equip ourselves as well as we can. And so therefore, we have undertaken a very detailed study. A company called Shah Consultants based in Pune has undertaken this study. The hydrological map of Telangana, hydrological map of Hyderabad has been prepared. We have mapped surface runoff flows, micro basins of drainages, blockade points, and what needs to be done to address the issue on a permanent basis. Out of this, we have actually formulated a new idea called a Strategic Nala Development Program, SNDP. Happy to share with you that this Nala development, which has started with about 1,000 crores of initial estimates, has been going well. Of course, there's a long way to go, but I do believe that we have made some few decisions, and few important projects have been kicked off in the right direction. The third thing I'd like to talk about is solid waste management. When this government came into office in 2014, the total waste collection, municipal solid waste collection in the city of Hyderabad was about 3,500 metric tons per day. But today, that has increased to 6,000 metric tons per day. And what we have done in the last 8 years is, we have come out with a policy on ensuring not just municipal solid waste, but all kinds of waste, construction and demolition waste, liquid waste, which is sewage, also biological waste, and e-waste. All of these forms of waste are being processed diligently, are being processed scientifically to ensure Hyderabad becomes a benchmark and Hyderabad becomes a leading example of how a city can function. Now let me elaborate a bit on municipal solid waste. We have in fact commissioned a 20 megawatt plant, South India's largest municipal waste to energy plant in Jawahar Nagar Corporation, which is very close to Hyderabad. Not only have we commissioned a 20 megawatt waste to energy plant, we are also building another 28 megawatts of capacity at this plant, which will consume all the dry waste. All the wet waste will be converted into compost, and it will be sold to farmers as fertilizer. The wet waste, the dry waste will be converted into power. Beyond this 48 megawatts of municipal waste to energy, we are also contemplating setting up another 20 megawatt plant. Altogether, this will take our capacities to nearly 68, I think 72, I believe, altogether. And this will ensure that 100% of all the dry waste in Hyderabad is converted or incinerated into energy. The other thing I'm very proud of also, Telangana in its municipalities, 142 municipalities, will be completing a very unique program called as the FSTP, the fecal sludge treatment plants. Human waste that's excreted is also now being processed, is also now being handled in a scientific fashion, and we are ensuring that on a modular basis, all municipalities by the end of next fiscal will be having a fecal sludge treatment plant. We've already completed this in 68 municipalities. We're also trying to cover the remaining by the end of this fiscal. Let me also quickly talk about some heritage restoration that we are very proud of, in Hyderabad. Recently as yesterday, I think it was, you may have seen a clipping in Times of India as well. In fact, I thank the entire team of Times of India for running a brilliant piece on heritage conservation and what needs to be done by the state, by the people, by the citizens, etc. I'm very proud that two of very important monuments, the step wells in Kuli Qutub Shah tombs have been recognized by UNESCO, and so has the Domakonda Fort in Kamareddy district. Both of these have been recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Monuments, but our ambition is larger. We want Hyderabad to be recognized as a World Heritage City, and we are working diligently towards it. Let me talk a bit about restoration of heritage structures that we have done as have been involved in as a government. One of the things I'm very proud about is the restoration of Mozum Zahi Market, which has once again regained its lost glory. Because I remember as a kid, as a student, I used to frequent the Mozum Zahi Market. You know, it is famous for its market, and also I don't know how many of you have had famous ice cream there. It is truly famous. You should try it if you haven't. Likewise, the clock tower at Mehboob Chowk, Sultan Bazaar, the CSI Church, Ram Gopal Pet Police Station at Monda Market, and Shah Ali Banda. All of these are being restored. We've also done Kaman restoration at Maula Ali Kaman, Char Kaman at Charminar, and Bansilal Pet Kaman at Secunderabad. I'm also happy to announce that restoration of step wells. I'm happy Kalpana Ramesh is here. She's been doing some pioneering work in restoration of step wells. Bapu Ghat, where she was also involved, her team was involved. Bansilal Pet, my compliments to you, Kalpana, and the entire team of municipal administration and others who have worked together. Gachi Bauli, Victoria Memorial School, Goshala, 6 step wells which have been restored by the Aga Khan Foundation at Kuli Qutub Shahi Tombs, and 2 step wells at Narayanpet and 1 at Chautupal. The initiative, which started at a small scale with the cooperation of Rainwater NGO, is now fast becoming a public movement, and a lot of people are taking pride in the restoration that has been done. In addition, we've also taken up some restoration works at Ashur Khana, Hussaini Alam, Darbar Hall, Khoti Women's College, and restoration of Kuli Qutub Shahi Tombs. Our upcoming restoration works also include reconstruction of Mehboob Chowk, popularly known as the Murgi Khana or Murgi Chowk, Sardar Mahal, Julu Kaman, Lad Bazaar, Miralam Mandi, State Central Library, Sheikpet Sarai, and Khurshid Zahi Devdi. These are some of the few. In fact, Hyderabad has about 218 heritage structures, both private and public. Our ambition, our goal, is to ensure that each of these structures is diligently restored and maintained for the benefit of our future generations. We're very confident. I mean, I can go on with a number of such initiatives, but we are very, very confident that with all these initiatives, by way of creating a circular economy, by focusing on sustainability, by ensuring that we also conserve our heritage structures, we will qualify to be among the list of UNESCO cities for World Heritage, as a World Heritage City. We've already been recognized by UNESCO in their list of cities for gastronomy. As you all know, Hyderabad's biryani is truly, truly world famous. So we have been recognized by UNESCO among the list of gastronomical cities popular for gastronomy. And again, like I mentioned, because of the work done by Aga Khan Foundation at the stepwells in Kuli Qutub Shahi Tombs, we've again been recognized by them. But our effort is to ensure that this continuous exercise, endeavor, to maintain that perfect mix of modernity and old world charm, rich heritage and culture, the Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb that Hyderabad is known for, will prosper, will thrive, and every Hyderabadi eventually will feel proud of all the work that is being done by the government and its citizens. I'd like to play a small video before I close out so that you understand exactly what is being done. Thank you. Jai Telangana.
Yes. Thank you so much, our Honorable Minister, for sharing valuable insights and inputs with all of us here today and always inspiring us. And then again, we look forward to seeing Telangana as one among the top 25 cities in the world. I now request Mr. Robin David to kindly please present the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, KTR Garu, for sharing your perspective. I think there were three takeaways for me from this entire exercise. One is that you want to make Hyderabad a climate resilient city. Secondly, you want Hyderabad to be one of the most livable cities in the world. And thirdly, you want it to become a World Heritage City. All three, Times of India would be very happy to work with you on. We've already done a sustained campaign on heritage. We will also work with you on the other two initiatives, even if we are occasionally critical of what we say. Thank you.
హాలిడే ప్లానింగ్ అంటే ఒక మూవీ అంత డ్రామా. అందుకే మరి iBook on Agoda 16 కోట్ల యాప్ డౌన్లోడ్స్, 29 లక్షల హోటల్స్ మరియు హోమ్ స్టేస్ అతి తక్కువ ధరలకే. Agoda ట్రై చేయండి.
Well, if you were dazzled by Mr. Sania's intellect, then we also have the stellar, unmatched brain power of Mr. Jaishankar, who's the architect now of a doctrine that is beginning to make waves globally. So viewers, thank you very much. Put your hands together for Mr. Jaishankar, who's made the time. He's been crisscrossing the world, but he's found a little bit of time for times now. Thank you very much. Mr. Jaishankar, you've just come back from Bali. Every time you open the newspapers, you're in some different part of the world. Speaking up for Brand India, as a colleague of mine just mentioned. From your vantage point, what is the world looking like? What is the current state of the world right now?
Bad.
Mad or bad?
Bad. Also a little mad. But seriously, I think the world is looking worried. The world is worried. People who thought that after 2.5 years of COVID would come out of it into a better situation have actually seen a very grim year this year. Just as an example, you know, the theme for the Bali G20 was I think something to the effect of recover strongly, recover together. So that kind of tells you what their hopes were about a year ago. I think the fact that we even came through Bali with the G20 relatively intact was itself an achievement. So today we have, I think, multiple stresses. There's still the consequences of the COVID. There are the results of this conflict in Ukraine, which when it happens in such a important area, in such a globalized environment, its consequences are felt across the world. We're also seeing, you know, the regularity of climate emergencies, climate events, affecting the routine nature of how the global economy functions. So here's the difference. 15 years ago, let's say before 2008 especially, but even after that, you would say, I have this wonderful globalized world, everything is going to work very seamlessly. Okay, I will build in some occasions when some things will go wrong. I think today we have to assume that there will be multiple prolonged crises. We have to build that into the system and then navigate it the best we can. So it's a completely different expectation level. And I would say in many ways it's changing the nature of international relations.
It's interesting. It's always, of course, difficult to crystal gaze. But how do you see India evolving in this mad and bad world over the next 5 years? Because there's been some talk about us breaching another frontier in the GDP sweepstakes, so to speak. So how does this work for India with all these pressures?
Well, I would say if the world's a tough place, it cannot be an easy place only for India. Okay. So to my mind, if I were to look at the next 2 years, I would say it'll be very important for our country to have the right kind of leadership, to have the systems in place, the confidence, the judgment, to navigate what will be a very stormy time. You know, I do fairly confidently predict at least a stormy, a turbulent, hopefully half a decade. Now, how do we navigate that turbulence? I think partly by studying the economy, under the circumstances, doing as strongly as we can, executing the reforms that we can do, we need to do. We should have done some of them a long time ago. And also in this, because relatively we would hopefully be better placed, see whether the process of India's rise continues even amidst the turbulence. I think that's broadly the kind of course we need to chart out. My own sense, very frankly, is that's also the expectation that the world, or the calculation much of the world has of us. As someone who, because I deal a lot with how foreigners look at India, I think they see a lot of our achievements perhaps with greater clarity and objectivity than we do, because we have very strong domestic debates. They look at the 2 point something billion shots in the arm, marvel at it. They look at the fact that, the kind of doomsday scenario that, there'd be so many people going back to their homes, how will you feed them? How will your economy not completely stall? All of that has proved to be unfounded. In fact, we have actually, I think perhaps most Indians don't entirely realize it, we have actually created a social security, social safety net in the course of the last 3 years. So they look at a lot of that, the last mile digital delivery, the improved quality of governance, the easier to do business, the fact that, and also today, the fact that the world is realizing there's an over concentration of manufacturing in a particular geography, and therefore they need to spread it out more. So there's much more interest in a lot of that happening. Many of our policies are designed to create a pull factor. So a lot of that is also happening.
Which foreigners? There are some foreigners, and there are some Indians in foreign lands who have a slightly different view, more oblique view, more pessimistic view of our politics, for example, of what they now popularly suggest is a democratic backsliding that is happening. And the attendant commentary that goes with it in various journals around the world. So there's that conversation also. Does that worry you, that all this bad publicity might deter investment, because there is continuous talk of a democratic deficit, which is so essential to keep all these processes, these procedures, these policies on track if India is sort of being torn asunder by so many vociferous political interventions, debates, social turmoil? What happens?
Well, look, at one level, I shrug my shoulders and say, in a globalized world, the debates and the politics of India will also play out beyond India's borders. And I treat a lot of this as actually politics in disguise. Politics disguised as reports, politics disguised as university pronouncements or NGO positions. But they're all very deeply political. Some of it, I think, is also I would say the unhappiness or the inability to accept that there is change happening in India which is not as you want it to happen. So if you look at this wonderful term which is almost an oxymoron, the electoral autocracy. I mean, just think, we are told on the one hand, somewhere democracy is shrinking, right? I mean, that was your question. So ask yourself, if things were so autocratic, why is Narendra Modi campaigning so hard in Gujarat? Because he should be sitting, on Lok Kalyan Marg with his feet up on the table, drinking his chai and saying, well, it's all fixed and this election is mine. So if the Prime Minister of India has to campaign election after election in the intense manner that he does, clearly he's working for the results that he gets. Okay? Now, I'm not suggesting that there are no problems in this country, far from it. Every society has its imperfections. The fact that people come to India and deliver lectures that we are not free, and do that in India and then go back, I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, there are countries where if you actually, try going to a few countries in the world and telling them what's wrong with them and see what happens to you. And, on top of it, if you look at these arguments, some of it, yes, are Indians who are abroad, because as I said, they are extrapolating our politics. But look at some of the other countries and the institutions which they have created, and I think I just heard the tail end of what Sanjeev Sanyal was saying before me. See, they create this narrative. The narrative goes like this. These are all the things that's wrong with you and you're answerable for it. Now, if you tell them, well, I think there are a few things wrong with you too. They say, yes, we know that. But that's not what we are debating. You are the guy in the dock. You are answerable. I'm the guy asking questions. It doesn't work the other way around. So, it is part today of a larger, I would say, a political, almost ideological debate which is going on in the world. It's played out in different parts of the world differently with different issues. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is, to use an old-fashioned term, it is very hegemonic. It is actually an elite, a set of people who are arbiters of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And so an electoral autocracy is a polity which throws up through elections results that you don't like. I mean, that's what's wrong with that country. That they're not electing the people who you want to get elected.
अद्भुत फर्नीचर कहाँ से लिया?
फर्लेंको से रेंट किया
और ये बाय किया। बाय एंड रेंट यानी फर्नीचर जैसे चाहो वैसे पाओ। You're killing me। तो मेरा वार्डरोब कहाँ लगेगा? Designer furniture you can rent or buy brand new। अब सब पे होगा फर्लेंको का भूत सवार।
Very interesting. How is it traveling with Prime Minister Modi? I'm changing the contours of this conversation now. You've been speaking about meeting him when you were an ambassador, and he came as a visiting chief minister, and that was sort of a view from the outside. What's it like now from the inside? what does Team Modi do that includes you now while planning for such high-stakes meetings, for example?
No, so what's the question in a sense? I mean, what is the process, or what is it like?
What's the process? What is it like to be? Well, look,
Well,
I mean, you know, he's been able to establish a lot of personal connections with a lot of world leaders. They're reciprocating and saying that he is an amazing leader and this, that, the other. You've seen the headlines and we've all read them. So there's that aspect of it. How much of your outreach, your planning is centered around his views? How receptive is he to the policy experts? How does it all work?
Well, that's very complicated and probably a very long story, but I'll give you a kind of sports analogy, if I might.
Okay.
You know, even if you're a natural player, perhaps especially if you're a natural player, you have to spend a lot of time on the nets to get your game right, you know. Now, in the case of the Prime Minister, yes, I mean, he has a flair, he has an ability to connect, he has a persona, he has a view, he has a tremendous expressiveness. All of that is true, you know, that's the bit which all of you see. But he's also an extremely well-prepared person, very thorough, very hardworking. So, I mean, since we are talking Bali, let us say, typically it would be, okay, before you hit a conference, I mean, weeks before that, you would already have started preparation. This is where we're going, those are the people we're meeting, these are the big issues. So, how do you prepare for those? Typically, a lot of our time on the plane is spent, there's actually a conference kind of table on the plane. We actually, you know, sometimes people ask me, so why do you look so tired getting off a plane? Mostly because a lot of it is spent on that conference table. And I actually like my sleep. And he does a lot of, you know, pre-meeting, post-meeting, because it's not just like a meeting is over and we are done with that. I mean, it is like, okay, very quick, how did it go? You know, what is the further steps? So the continuous brief, debrief, correct, prepare, update, it's a sort of, it's a process. And it is something that keeps you on the toes, because in order for us to work with him, we have, you know, there's a back end to what we do. So in a sense, I would say, you know, there's a kind of a team sort of system that also he harnesses very well. I mean, he's by nature very much of a team person. And quite honestly, I would say perhaps his strength that I have seen is a willingness to actually ask a lot of questions and to listen to a lot of things. He's a very good listener. Never ever forget that.
How much of this came into play when you had to draft this very tricky G20 resolution?
హాలిడే ప్లానింగ్ ఇదేదో తెలుగు మూవీలా లేదు. అన్నదమ్ముల మధ్య గొడవ,
అంతే బ్రేక్ఫాస్ట్ ఇంక్లూడ్ అయితే చాలు.
నిస్సహాయమైన అమ్మ,
బడ్జెట్లో వస్తుందా?
పిసినారి శెట్టి, నన్ను కాపాడడానికి ఈల వేస్తూ వస్తున్న హీరో. 16 కోట్ల యాప్ డౌన్లోడ్స్, 29 లక్షల హోటల్స్ మరియు హోమ్ స్టేస్ అతి తక్కువ ధరలకే. ఈ పిక్చర్ హిట్ అయింది, అది కూడా ట్రై చేయండి.
We know the backstory a little bit, but I would like to hear it from you.
No, you know,
I mean, the American NSA put it down to...
In the Bali.
Yes, I mean, India is sort of being...
Look, a lot of it actually had started happening even before we hit Bali. Because I mean, if you look at it, essentially there was a part about it's not an era of war. There was a part about how do you describe what the Russian actions were in a way in which others also accepted it. There was a bit about the nuclear, the concerns on the nuclear front. So some of it was actually, I would say, days, even weeks ahead of the conference. I mean, you may recall, for example, I had gone about a week before, maybe more than a week before, to Moscow. And one of the reasons, again, I went was actually to partly prepare for a kind of landing ground, a common landing ground in Bali. So when you read about meetings which take place, Prime Minister calling up people or talking to people, often these are conversations which feed into what is an eventual outcome. Now, it wasn't only, a matter of getting the, 4 paragraphs right. We actually had even issues out there in the conference. You sort of do a lot of it by trying to make yourself acceptable to a wide group of nations and trying to bridge the gap, for which, by the way, when they use the word honest broker, the important word is honest. I mean, your sincerity, your commitment needs to be on display.
Well, that's very interesting because obviously we've taken over now the presidency of G20. The Ukraine war is still looking like a morass that is not going to resolve itself very soon. There will be pressures. We have a moral core at our foreign policy that dictates the contours of how we relate between nations. And there's a conflict here, isn't this? I mean, if the Prime Minister says not a time for war, the West is expecting India to say, well, then step up to the plate, start voting perhaps against Russia and do things that are more optically, in the interests of pushing Russia into some sort of a détente.
Now, look, let me ask you a counter question. You think by voting for something I will end the war? So what is actually my goal? Is my goal to sort of score points, or is my goal to actually get an outcome? I would suggest to you that, in a very polarized situation, if you actually sort of go with the flow of the debate, when it comes to the real issues, you would not be relevant. You would not be relevant because you would be part of the polarization. That when countries look for the middle ground, had I done all the things that you were saying, I would have been of no use to anybody, including myself in Bali. I mean, I had a role in Bali precisely because, different countries. I mean, if the Russians had good things to say about us, and the Americans had good things to say, and the Europeans had good things to say, and so did a number of other countries, it is because at the end of the day, people know the way I am approaching this conflict is, how do I find a way of ending it? Not how do I vote in a particular issue on a particular day and then say it's not my problem. So I think I've taken a bigger in a sense, a bigger view, a longer view, a more serious view of the problem. And I have positioned myself accordingly. And I would say, to some degree, the events in Bali have borne out the correctness of the Prime Minister's judgment on this.
It's very interesting because it depends, obviously, on what is being sought. What issue is it that the West wants India to step up to the plate, so to speak?
No, but why should I step up to what the West wants? I will step up to what I want, no? I mean, look, I have a fundamental problem with how this entire debate is being framed, because it goes back to the earlier questions you are asking, which is, a set of people say, by the way, this is the right thing to do, and why aren't you doing it? So I am not running a foreign policy for the demands of other countries and other people. I'm running a foreign policy for what I think is globally good. and what is in my country's interest. And I believe today that if you look at now it's what, 8 months, 9 months since the conflict started. I do believe in these 9 months, India's interests have been well served. I believe today that we have today a credible position as a country which is an advocate of sobriety, which has credibility, which wants the conflict to end, which is capable of working with other countries. There are some other countries like us. We're not alone in this. And I think that's the right thing to do. Now, if that doesn't meet every expectation of some Western countries or many Western countries, I'd say, well, frankly, tough luck.
It's interesting because you're also part of a Quad, and some of the member states of the Quad have an expectation. They've taken a position. How does that square with these alliances? I know you've spoken about plurilateralism.
Look, if, let us say, you say some members of the Quad have an expectation. Okay, I also have an expectation of the world. So tell me,
what are these expectations?
No, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I have a neighbor who practices terrorism day in, day out. Why don't all of them sign up for everything that I am saying? Why don't they have identical positions with me on terrorism? You know, where is group unity when it comes to that? And that, by the way, is a much older problem. So, look, you can't, the Quad was never envisaged as 4 countries having identity or positions on all issues in the world. The Quad is an exercise of convergence where in the Indo-Pacific, we have a lot of common interests and an ability to work together. Even in the Indo-Pacific, we may not agree on everything, but we have substantial agreement. But there would be other areas. You picked Ukraine. I could as well pick Pakistan or Afghanistan and say, okay, why aren't you all endorsing India's position? But many of them are not. I mean, some of them don't even endorse my map. Forget about my position.
That's a very interesting point. Yes, of course, you're right. But in the context of this, the expectations, we've just seen US President Biden sign up with Pakistan a deal to provide them military hardware for the upkeep of their existing weapon systems, aircraft, etc. That must have made you look a little askance. You must have said, this is a bit hypocritical. They expect me to do their bidding in this theater, but when it comes to honoring my expectations, they seem to be moving closer in a direction that I don't want them to. Did that go through your mind, or you said, well, this is just the way the cookie
crumbles? A lot of things went through my mind. I'm not sure I would repeat the exact words that I did, but look.
No, what were these words? These sound like interesting words.
Pakistan.
ఏ అజయ్, మీ నాన్నగారిని చూడు. ఈ వయస్సులో మనం ఇలా ఉండగలమా?
తప్పకుండా ఉంటాం, నాన్నగారిలా సరైన ప్లానింగ్ చేసినట్లయితే.
అంటే
మా నాన్నగారు ఎల్ఐసి వారి జీవనక్షయలో ఇన్వెస్ట్ చేశారు. అది ఇమీడియట్ ఇంకా గ్యారంటీడ్ అన్విటీ ఇస్తుంది, రెగ్యులర్ ఇంటర్వెల్స్ లో జీవితకాలం పాటు.
వాహ్!
ఎల్ఐసి యొక్క యాన్యుటీ ప్లాన్స్ ఇస్తాయి యాన్యుటీ ఆప్షన్స్ మరియు క్రమం తప్పని ఆదాయం పొందడంలో సౌలభ్యం కూడా. ఎల్ఐసి ప్రతి క్షణం మీ తోడు.
Is an issue on which historically we have had differences with Western countries. The differences may have increased or decreased, but the differences have never gone away. For whatever reason, different Western countries have perceived a utility for Pakistan in their larger calculations, and therefore often practice policies and do actions which are against our interests and obviously with which we are deeply concerned. So I have today built a relationship with the major Western countries, or you can say broadly with the West, recognizing that this is an issue on which I do not have agreement. That there will always, it will be my endeavor to try to persuade them to see it the way I do. And, there will be issues on which they have been, Western countries have been very strongly supportive of us. Say, for example, if I were to look at 26/11, anniversary is tomorrow, and I look at, which are the countries who are supporting listing of wanted terrorists, wanted in the context of 26/11 in the UN procedure, many of those are Western countries, and I acknowledge that. So I have a mixed bag. Nobody, look, in international relations, it's very rare, almost impossible for two countries to have identical positions on all the issues of the world. And especially the bigger you are and the more a diversity of interest you have, there will be overlaps of positions. There will be, as we say, it is convergence, it is not congruence. So my school geometry still serves me well. So there isn't a perfect overlap. And I have to live with it like they have to live with it. I mean, my point in recent months is, look, guys, I have lived with a lot of things you've done and said which I don't like. Now, sometimes you will maybe hear some of that from me too. Live with it.
Live with it. Independent foreign policy. Let me come back to this listings you mentioned, and we know that there is one obstacle in the way of listing of terrorist entities, especially in the UN, and that's China. China, that obviously is not just some sort of a regional player, and it has interests, a big country. And it's not just a neighborhood issue, is it, between India and China? How do you define this problem? I mean, just recently, in the Bali conference, the opposition here, for example, said, Prime Minister, when he met Xi Jinping, unko laal aankhein nahi dikhain. Laal aankhein was the word that was trending, and this, that, the other. So there's an expectation here from the opposition, from others, who say, oh, we need to be more hectoring of China, we need to be more in their face.
This is said by people who went to the Beijing Olympics. So, no, I'm just trying to understand it.
Is it a rhetorical question? Because it most certainly looks like one. Well, you know, the usual opposition voices that have been repeatedly making themselves heard. I'm not saying the usual suspects. I'm not disparaging of the opposition. All I'm saying is that there are a group of leaders who did express a great disappointment at the fact that the Prime Minister didn't collar Xi Jinping or whatever they imagined he would be doing. So there's that. And there's, of course, the China question. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Look, when it comes to China, there is the reality of China, the second biggest economy in the world, our proximate neighbor, but also one with whom we've had, to put it politely, a difficult history, where we've had conflict. We have a very major boundary dispute, and where on many issues of high importance to us, they have not been supported. This could be our quest for permanent membership of the UN Security Council and reform of the UN. It could be our candidature for becoming a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, or it could be those issues you mentioned, listing of UN terrorists, and it could be something far more basic, and this is something which goes back to the 1950s and 60s, which is their relationship with Pakistan, and how that relationship in Pakistan, with Pakistan, actually affects the security interests of India. These are out there. We all know that these are out there. Now, to my mind, the right way of dealing with it is to be firm when you have to be firm. So, if you have to move troops up to the border to deal with what they are trying to do, you should do that. On issues where they do not support or undermine our interests, to be frank about it and to be public about it where required. I don't say public about it all the time, but where diplomacy requires it, it's often useful to be public. Where you feel there's still room for progress, I would say maybe I'd find a different way of handling it. And at the same time, maintain, you know, I would say the decorum and the dignity of how, you know, leaders behave. I think that is how this is managed, and I think that's exactly how this has happened. Now, there are people, you know, who can take positions, I guess, especially if they're free of responsibility, you can be pretty sort of casual or thoughtless about what you say. You know, it's a free country. I mean, people are entitled to say things, but I think responsible, sensible people will see that, you know, there are ways in which a leader of India behaves. If you're going to be a president of a G20, you're going to be president of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, those are responsibilities that you have taken on.
So you see no contradiction between the lack of perhaps public posturing by the Prime Minister on China and what he does privately. That's what you're saying.
No, I don't think the Prime Minister has postured publicly on China. I think the Prime Minister has been very firm on China. And the Prime Minister has been very, very clear that, and not just in his words, he's actually been very clear in his actions. I mean, please understand the efforts which were made from 2020 onwards in maintaining such a large force on our borders. It's an enormous enterprise. And at the end of the day, that is the answer. I mean, I would rather have a Prime Minister who does things than to have a Prime Minister who pontificates but doesn't actually do it out there. So, in the case of Prime Minister Modi, I think he should be judged by the fact that the Indian military today is deployed in strength on the borders with China as a result, you know, to respond to the challenges of 2020.
What do you think of the relationship as it evolves? I've been reading a lot of commentary that this extension of Mr. Xi's term in power, perhaps indefinitely, is going to create more friction between the two countries. He is in a different mold from his predecessors. Do you share this assessment? Are we really headed for a fraught relationship as we move forward?
No, I don't think we should approach the China relationship, and we haven't actually approached it as a behavioral or a term-driven policy. I think we have structural long-term challenges. My regret is we have not taken that seriously. I mean, look, today I'm speaking to you about sending troops up there. But remember, 10 years ago, you actually had people in the, you know, saying that our best defense is not to develop the border. And that is a way of dealing with the border problem. So, look, finally, to me, developing your border infrastructure, building deep strengths, creating greater capabilities within the country. All these are part of how India sort of prepares for the world. And it doesn't have to be against somebody. You know, it's hypothetically. Suppose China doesn't exist. Does it mean I must leave my border undeveloped? Border areas undeveloped? Does it mean I should not build up my manufacturing and my industrial capability? So it's not like you have to have an adversary or an animosity to do it. I think this is part of how big powers develop, and if it is our aspiration to be a leading power, I think it's important to not just behave like one and act and talk like one, but it is equally important to do the things on the ground in the country. When I look at reform in the country, for me there's a direct connection between the reform and our foreign policy standing. When you asked at the beginning, how does the world see India and Prime Minister Modi? The world sees Prime Minister Modi as someone who's prepared to do tough things at home in order to prepare India for what is to come. And that for them is a big change.
what is to come? What are going to be the areas of contestations as we move forward on this?
No, look, again, how India and China reach some kind of balance, that will happen if it does, through events, processes unfolding. But I stress to you again, this is not a binary game between India and China. There is a whole world out there of almost 200 countries. I am today, as India, engaged in the kind of changes and development and processes and progress, which is designed to take me to a much higher level, which I believe is kind of my destiny, if you would. Now, China happens to be one important part. I'm not diminishing it in any way. But I am doing it for myself. I'm not doing it because some other country is pressurizing me or because I have a problem with them. Now, how do I reach a balance with China? It's a very tough question because, look, we have two huge handicaps dealing with China. One, that we lost the 1962 war. Now, the consequence of that is being felt even today. So, today when people write about a bridge which is coming up or some village which is coming up, please remember, these were areas you lost in 1962. And if that had not happened, this wouldn't have happened. So, the loss in 62 is still a handicap that we carry. We may regret it, but it doesn't reverse it. The second is the changes. We started reforms, let us say, 15 years later than China, and our reforms were half-hearted. They were never deep enough as China's were. We haven't built that economic strength. In 1988, when Rajiv Gandhi went to China, India and China were economies of the same size. Today, China is 4.5 times ours. What does it tell us? It tells us, even if we progress,